Okay, so we are looking at soil tonight. So I've been meaning to comment on this. Here's some nice little quotes from Ellen White that I think it gives us a little why and perspective on why it's important to learn how to grow and grow well. So again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country where they can raise their own provisions. And why should they do that? Because in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one.
Yeah.
We should now begin. It didn't say in the future you shall begin. Today is the day. We should begin to heed the instruction given to us over and over again. And she has many other comments about moving to the country. Get out of the cities into the rural districts. Where the houses are not crowded closely together and where they'll be free from the interference of enemies. So that was in 1904, not too far before she passed away. 12, I think, was it 2012? Or not 2000, but 1912, or 15. Was it 15? Oh yeah, she was after the Titanic, I think. So hoarded wealth will soon be worthless when the decree shall go forth that no one shall buy or sell except they have the mark of the beast. Very much means will be of no avail. So that could apply to getting a few equipment for gardening, or also spreading the gospel. Think about what we have saved up for maybe the future where maybe we won't be able to utilize it. So God calls us now to do all in our power to send forth the warning to the world. Be a Review and Herald, 1878. So in the last great conflict, in the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. So it's a nice little statement to keep in mind, earthly support cut off. So think about how we are to grow food for our families and provide for others as well that have just come in to learn the truth or don't know how to provide for their own necessities, because they refuse to break his law in obedience to earthly powers. They will be forbidden to buy and sell. So that's something to think about, staying true to God no matter what the difficulties are ahead. And then he says, so Satan says, for the fear of wanting food and clothing, they will join with the world in transgressing God's law. And so that's one of the reasons why, if we can provide for our food needs at least, and clothing can last a few years, so it's not a huge concern, but we may also be evicted out of our homes and told to go elsewhere. So having a little bit of skill of sewing and making of clothes, or finding some way to make fibers as well might be a useful skill. So anyway, just some thoughts there. So then we're going to look at adjusting mineral profile. So this is kind of like preparing our soils, getting them initially ready to find out if there's some deficiencies that we can take care of initially, so they won't have to worry about taking care of them later when we can't buy the minerals easily. So how do we do that? So biology can provide 100% of a plant's nutritional requirements, provided those minerals are in the soil profile. So we learned about the horizons last week, and the different layers. And so it's basically talking about somewhere in that, in those layers, are those minerals available, or are they missing from your particular area? And so how do you know that? Well, you test. And so the best way that's been recommended is to do a geological assay, not essay, but assay. So this is what the miners always did when they started a claim. They'd take a rock and they take it into the assay office, and they'd figure out how much of a particular mineral, gold, silver, etc., is in here, what percentage. And so it's a similar type of thing where they're heating the rock up, or in our case would be a soil, and figuring out which minerals are in there, probably by putting some kind of acids or other chemical reactions in there so they can reveal is that mineral in there.
Is this like testing for the pH balance?
Well, sort of. You're sending in a soil sample. That's where the similarity ends. You can have them also, Midwest Labs will also do all kinds of different soil tests as well. So this is their PT2 total minerals assay. And so it's not, total is kind of a, not a very total word. I mean, a very good word for it, because totals of, I guess you could say the totals of these, it's kind of a small range, but it's not too bad. So there's our nitrogen, sulfur, potassium. No, I keep forgetting. Phosphorus, I think, potassium, magnesium, calcium, nickel, I believe, iron, aluminum, manganese, copper, and zinc.
Cool.
How many of you figured those out and remembered?
I have a couple of those.
Okay, so alternatively, so if you really don't want to test, you can just keep adding. Hopefully you'll find the ones that you're missing. But
what is the fee for testing, and how much do you have to send in?
it's about 2 cups, and it's around $30, I think,
Have you done that?
for one sample. I've been meaning to. I haven't yet. So I would like to, but
Now,
you know, trying to
you get
remember.
the sample, do they want you to get it like a few inches from the top?
So
or like
6 inches. So usually when you do a soil test, you want to take dig a hole around 6 inches deep, and then you want to take a spoon or a cup or something and scrape up the hole. So you want to get a combination of all the way, so you don't want to just take a scoop off the top and off the bottom. You want to kind of make it all the way down, so it's everything that's in those 6 inches basically.
So why would you go 6 inches if you don't plant seeds that deep?
The roots go down that deep. They go down a foot too. I mean, like tomato plants can even go down, and some even go like several feet, if not, as far as they can go down. Yeah. So anyway, what you can do is, as a remedy, is to add basalt rock dust over several years. You keep adding, putting the minerals back in, which is a broad spectrum. And so,
where do you get that?
The rock quarry. So there's like Liberty has it available.
And it's a powdery type of a thing?
Yeah. So it's basically all the screenings and everything that's fine. So they do the rock crushing to make the gravel. All this dust gets in there and the fines get created, and they can't sell that normally. There's a lot of that they have to screen out to get all their bigger chunks, and so they put it in huge piles. They got pile after pile there. You're like, what are they going to do with all this? I don't know, but
so if you buy gravel, you still get some of that.
Yeah, you can get 3/4 minus, and you can get some of that in there, and you take your little screen out there, and you can.
We did that last year. We had like this huge pile for. Anyhow, me and the girls were like, But yeah, we got like almost a bucket full of dust, like. Oh, really?
Yeah.
But it took us like I don't know, a couple of weeks to get it full. We went out there every day. So.
Yeah. Well, you still have to screen it. One year they pre-screened their stuff, and I'm like, ooh, this is nice stuff. And it was all powdery, and there wasn't any rocks in there.
Oh, really?
And then last year I ordered 12 yards. So I said, well, can't you just bring me out a dump truck of this stuff? And they dumped it, and so it's like, then I looked at it and it's like, it isn't very fine. I still had to screen the stuff. So it's like maybe 20% stuff that I don't want. And so little small rocks and then little bigger ones. But then I can put them out on the driveway and make use of the stuff, but I still have to sit there and screen it. So what I used was, what did I use? A window screen or something like that? Yeah, I think it was a window screen. Aluminum one. Probably hard to find, but I had some extras laying around. Or was it? Maybe it was bigger than that. I can't remember now, but I think it was a little bigger because that was a little bit too fine. It was really hard to get the stuff through.
So is it bad to have small rock in with your soil anyway?
Well, Well, I don't know. It gets in the way of when you go out there and hoe and work in the soil. You get these rocks in there, and it dulls your shovel hits them. You hear grinding and dulls things down. It doesn't. The plants don't care so much, but your tools do, and so it's kind of, it gets in the way. And if you get obviously too much, when it's like 30% rock, then you're kind of losing, a lot of growing area and space for those roots to go, because now they have to go all the way around. There's that much less soil that is in your garden. So generally I take out rocks that big and maybe a little bit smaller, just when I find them, like chuck them out of there when they're a couple inches in diameter, just to get them out of there, because they just get in the way for all the cultivating and other stuff. When I stick a trowel or a shovel in there or something, it just kind of gets in the way. But and also they don't break down as fast near as the powdery. As smaller it is, the rocks are, the closer it is to turning into something that the biology can break down and make available. But
when we first moved to our house, working in the yard, I found a lot of nails.
yeah.
So do people put nails in their ground for the same reason?
Not that I've heard of. Especially around this area, it's kind of high iron, so I don't think there'd be any benefit. I've actually stuck a magnet on some of my dry dust. It sticks. It's amazing. My dad said, "Oh, that's just that area. Somebody had some iron filings there." I was like, "No, I went out in my garden, did the same thing. It still stuck." There's good art, and we have orange water if we don't filter, and so does Rita.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's something you can or cannot do, but
Do you have sulfur too?
no.
I have cyanide in the well.
Ooh.
But slow, it's
Getting warm in here. Okay, so principles here. So we started with a little bit of video. So this is some of the principles of regenerative agriculture. So I just want to go over those quickly here just to get an idea. So soil armor is kind of the official generic term, rather than which includes mulches, plants growing, things like that. So compost, a whole range of things, anything that's keeping the bare soil surface from being exposed to rain and air and light. So that would increase the habitat for soil biology. They like to have a good covering and protects them and makes a nice environment for them. Plus it's food for the organisms, especially the fungus and the bacteria, to take that in. The earthworms like it, a whole range of biology likes that, so it helps with that. Nutrient cycling, so you're basically increasing the biology when you have it covered, so that they can provide your plants with more. So kind of make the biology there. Aggregate structure, and we'll look at that a little bit. So aggregate structure, we can look at that now. So I have two soil samples here. Tilled and untilled, forest and non-forest. So this is the healthy forest soil. So you notice the size of the particles. So that is, so you can see this is fairly fine and breaks apart. This is what it'll look like after you go through and till your garden. Mm-hmm. And it looks like, oh, that's so pretty and nice. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, oh, that's kind of lumpy and icky, but the plants like this way better. Yep. Huh. So it's the fungus that are the main reason why this is lumpy, as it were. Wow. So they get in there and they produce.
Who's better, you said?
There's a term, and I can't remember. I have it on my slide of what they're actually producing. There's a carbohydrate, I think.
Cool.
That they produce. That it's like a glue.
Can I touch it?
Yeah, you can.
Any worms in there?
Ooh, lunch.
And there's some critters in here as well.
Really?
So all the arthropods and microarthropods and worms and other little larger creatures too are running around in there. So,
like mud pie.
Right.
And there's lots of organic matter in the one. So basically I went to a tree, raked back all the moss and the leaves, and then I just take some of that with my shovel. And and it falls apart. It's crumbly. It moves. It's not all solid, and so that's what plants like, and they have the big particle sizes are beneficial to
Dark
them.
brown is good.
Yeah, the darker the better usually.
That means it has moisture in there, right?
It's organic matter that so organic matter
It's like
has
dry, deserty.
humic acid is generally what's causing that, the darkening. So
Oh wow.
it's fungus and well, see, actually I can't say it's fungus because I know in a compost pile you get it, and there generally isn't much fungus in a compost pile. It's mainly bacteria, but it's like, I guess, bacteria pee, you could say. It's kind of a dark liquid, and if you take a pile of compost on a screen and you run water through it, you get a dark liquid out the other end. It's not mud, it's humic acids that fungus eat. Humic, H-U-M-I-C, not hummus, as somebody, I guess that's
But
the other.
You just said something I have a question about. I was
Yeah.
thinking about a few weeks ago. Having compost, so it's not fungus, it's bacteria.
Generally, it's bacteria dominated. There may be some fungus in there. If you leave it over a full year, towards the end, there'll be some fungus getting in there and coming in there and chewing stuff up as well.
So I was watching this thing, they want a greenhouse. But then it's like, well, we need to put, solar panels or something to have heat in there. And then I saw this one video on YouTube, so I'm like, oh, let's ask Dan. And there was this gal that has this pillar of chicken wire.
Okay.
Like 5 feet or so tall. And then, so she
okay.
has compost stuff in there, to create
Yeah.
heat. So she says this would get about close to 100 degrees inside the greenhouse. Wow. And then he's like, well, wouldn't that create fungus? I'm like, what? Isn't it bacteria though? So there would be more bacteria, so you wouldn't want to have that for too long.
Well, it'll cool off over time. There's like a nice little scale of the temperature going down after it peaks, and you don't turn it or something, then the temperature goes down, and it will eventually cool off.
What I'm saying though is that since fungus is not good for us to be breathing fungus,
right.
we don't want to be in the greenhouse working with that fungus around us.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious as to how often you would have to clear it out.
That might be a bad place to be. I would be cautious about putting compost, because even this white poofs of stuff as you turn grass and hay and things like that, that's not good stuff at all for your lungs. You want to keep that out of your lungs. So wear a mask if you're forking hay or something that's gotten moldy or something like that, and you see any kind of like white stuff pluming up.
Yeah, so I was curious because she was saying, and if you're in a greenhouse, you'll have some ventilation, but if you're inside working with the plants and then you're smelling these fumes because it's heating up your greenhouse, I should ask Dan, what's he thinks about that?
And also, remember your temperature. I think I covered the photorespiration temperature, so like 80 degrees and above, the plants aren't doing so well. Once they hit about 90, they stop photosynthesizing and go into photorespiration, so they're sucking moisture up and trying to give it off as fast as they can to cool their temperatures. So if you have a greenhouse, don't let it get, keep the ventilation going well. I mean, especially even on some of these sunny days we have now. I had mine up to 90, 95 there, and I'm like, oop. So it's time to get the doors open, the flaps, and get the air going quick to get those plants cooled down, because that's not good to have them that hot.
Wow.
So, all right, so then let's see, soil erosion, protects against soil temperatures getting too high, greater quantities of water holding ability. So remember in the video they said the compost in the soil was giving them much water holding ability, so they didn't have to water so much. So that's one of the benefits of keeping the soil covered. Plant diversity is the second principle. Not just have a monocrop, as they call it. One plant always there, and then the same plant there every single year. Rotating through a different plant, or not having a whole row of one thing. If you can interplant, you get better biology, more diversity, and ability for those different plants to feed different biology that grab different minerals, and different plants will will be high in certain minerals. And if you look at nutrition in plants, like for eating, like what's the nutrition in spinach, and it'll be higher in certain ones than other plants. And so because of that diversity, you're pulling up certain minerals for this plant and other ones for this one, and then when they decay, or you're putting them back in the soil, or just the fact that they're getting into the roots and stuff like that, getting different minerals being released, and the biology's much more broad if there's lots of different types of plants growing rather than just one. So that's kind of the principle there. So rotating and then having several plants at the same time and is beneficial. Not necessarily have to, but it does increase the having at least 2, maybe 3 different types of plants growing in the same bed can help with the vigor, and also with pest control too. It can confuse the pests, and just the plants help each other too. Like I do my beans and my corn together, and they are very happy together. And
Companions.
yep, and you can also, so there's another video from Singing Frog Farms, and he actually shows tomatoes with his lettuce, so that the ground isn't bare for all this long period as these tomatoes grow up tall, and they're not covering the soil very well. And so you can put other little plants along there, put radishes and other things that grow quite fast interplant among bigger plants, like broccoli or something like that, where it's going to take a while for the plant to get up there. You can plant other stuff that's quicker around it, or carrots or something like that. It's plant diversity. Yep, almost every year, and then freeze it, and it's very good. There's Umpqua from Adaptive Seed is the best variety I found that works well in this area. Seems the most reliable, and then also has these little side shoots. After you take the main head off, it has all these side shoots that come up, and you can keep harvesting them, and keep breaking them off, and does a very nice job of giving you a long period of harvest rather than just one head and then it's kind of done. And it's also like open pollinated, so you can actually save the seed the next year. And
How to keep the bugs away?
Having healthy plants, that's how.
Yeah.
So I don't really have, let's see, so flea beetles occasionally will get in there. They're pretty tough, and so you got to have a really healthy broccoli to keep them away. And then you just kind of you can move them too, like don't put them in the same bed each year, and then it confuses the flea beetles because they lay their eggs in the soil and they overwinter, and then they come up in the spring. So if you move your plants, they're like, whoop, nothing here. Put something else there that they don't like, a non-brassica. So your tomatoes, or I don't know, carrots or something like that, something that they don't care so much for.
So where did you say the broccoli, the Umpqua brand, where'd you get it from?
Adaptive Seeds, yeah, it's in
Sweet Home.
yeah, Sweet Home area, right there in
You
Brush
know
Creek
where-
Road. Yeah, but they don't allow you to go in there and shop there. I asked, can I come out to your farm? And no, we don't allow anyone. We just ship it out. Okay, 2.5 miles away, you can ship it to me.
Oh,
Seems
so
kind of
you
silly,
order
but
it.
I'm like 2.5 miles away from
They
them or
don't
something.
like to,
They have a
markets-
website, yeah.
markets.
No, they just have a website that you can order the stuff from. It's, $3 or $4 for shipping, so as long as you get several different plants or several different packets, it's not bad. It's like $3.50 a packet or something.
You don't go to like the First Alternative or anything?
Me?
No, the
Oh,
seed place.
I don't know. Maybe they might for something. They might have a few sources that they market their stuff to. It changes over time, so they may have to see.
I've tried a broccoli, but I haven't had much success with it. I'll get a few little
Yeah,
plants and
well,
I'll try this one.
so you need fairly good soil before you start doing broccoli. Like the first 3 or 4 years, I didn't have any luck with broccoli. It took a while before the soil was built up enough. Adding compost every year and mulch and having those plant roots decay in the soil and different stuff, it finally was able to support the broccoli. They need a lot of nutrition and nitrogen and things like that, which just dumping on a bunch of nitrogen doesn't always fix the problem.
Were vegetables part of the original diet in the garden?
No,
Because I have a friend that's trying to convince me that like vegetables are bad.
Oh.
And that's why kids hate them, because it's a natural thing. It's just like, they love fruits. They love.
Well, you know, do you ever watch Barbara? I know you watch Barbara O'Neill. I was watching her today.
Yeah, I've seen her recently.
She was talking about how we have to be careful. There's acid things and there's
alkaline,
alkaline, and so some fruit. I think I eat too much fruit, but anyway, sometimes we can eat something. And tomatoes, like if you have arthritis and stuff, they could be bad.
Wow.
So he's half right, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't believe him yet, but I don't know.
Watch Barbara O'Neill.
Well, so something to think about. If you take a beet, if you eat the leaves and throw away the bulb, you're better off than doing the reverse. You're getting more nutrition in the leaves than you'll ever get in the body of it per weight. So obviously you get if you got a big beet and you got these little tiny leaves, there's probably more nutrition in the whole beet because there's more quantity there. But the leaves generally are, especially beet leaves are the highest nutrient. Well, I don't know if the highest, but they're way up there of normal stuff that we grow in the garden. I think there's maybe a couple other plants specialty ones that may be higher, but they're very high in minerals and vitamins and everything else. Collards, anything dark green, kale and collards are very good.
Darker the better.
Yeah, and they're a fairly wide variety of minerals too, and vitamins, a lot of B12s and stuff like that. Very good stuff, but so don't eat just fruit. God gave us the vegetables as well after the fall.
I guess so. Huh?
For the healing of the nations, as it were, to heal our bodies. So we got that diversity. We got continuing live plant roots, which we've talked about before. Just another principle to capture carbon from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide and feed soil biology. So remember the plants are exuding exudates, which are sugars and proteins and carbohydrates and things like that into the soil for the biology to eat that we could never feed in the same quantity if we dump molasses every day on our garden. We could try, but the plants do a much better job, so let them do it for free. So continuing to build soil aggregates. So again, our aggregates there, that's what we want. So living roots will help facilitate that, as well as the fungus. Mobilizing nutrients, so they're causing nutrients to be put in a form that the plants can use, because they're sending out those exudates. The biology is returning the minerals and releasing them from the soil. And then keeping your mycorrhizal fungi alive, because if there is no living roots, you have bare soil for a couple of years, guess what? All that mycorrhizal fungi, which creates relationships with the roots, as in the rhizo is having to do with roots. So that's why you'll never find mycorrhizal fungi in the compost pile, because unless you have living roots in there. And a lot of times, if it's just bare ground, it's been bare for years, you need to bring in some soil from some other places that have good biology. Most likely, go to a nearby forest or some shrubs or grass field or somewhere where you can get some mycorrhizal spores and things like that. Repopulate your garden if it's been bare for a long time, because they do die out and they don't just come back. So you can also get inoculants too, but most of the time getting it locally, it's out there in nature. You don't have to go too far to find some areas where there's some plants growing, and scarf the grass off and take some shovelfuls of dirt from underneath that and use that as inoculant. So you can put that in a bucket of water, swish it all around and water your garden, run that over your garden, the muddy water basically, after it settles out a little bit. So you're not just putting chunks of dirt in your watering can or something like that, but kind of filter it out a little bit, so all that biology gets put into solution, and you can inoculate your soil with that. So, and then I won't bother talking about this. Most of this, that isn't going to be an option anyway, to have livestock running around our garden, cows and sheep and goats, maybe if you want to do that. I suppose chickens would be an option if you wanted to do that during the winter time, have them run out there.
You don't have any animals?
I have cats and worms, and no, I don't have any outdoor animals, which I'm very pleased with. It's like I can just go on vacation. I can do all kinds of stuff because it's not tied down by livestock.
That's true.
They're fun, but not necessary. And then minimizing soil disturbance is our kind of our no-till as much as possible. Don't destroy too much when you're excavating your potatoes and carrots and things like that. Try to minimize how much you're tearing up the soil. So that's going to help with keeping our aggregates from getting destroyed. When you go in there with the tiller, it kind of crumbles them all up, and then it takes a while for them to get put back. So the physical structure we want to worry about, also the microbial parts of the soil. So mainly the fungus. So it tears all that up. So they have these little fungal hyphae, which are this.
Ooh.
So we'll look at these. So this is fungus, and these are called fungal hyphae. There they are. Hyphal. There's different spellings. AE is the hyphae. HYPH. That's these little guys. So they're kind of on the bacteria scale almost. So you can think of a little bacteria, would be some little dots in there, maybe about that size, little nodules or something like that. So there's, under the microscope, you can see they're like, plant, just like plant roots or something like that, or, it's things there's stuff flowing through there, nutrients and things like that. So that's how the forest gets fed. When there's very poor nutrition, just, enough for all these trees, well, the fungus gets out in there and pulls it in from long distances and connects up with the roots of the trees and feeds the trees that way. Because there isn't enough nutrition and other stuff coming in. It's kind of a closed loop. So the fungus is breaking down all the leaves that come down and reprocessing those and feeding the trees back. So that's, and then this is the stuff that glues the particles together. Did I write it down? Well, I was intending to put, there it is. If you ever, it's like cell something. Can't remember now what it is. Did it say in here? No, I was intending to put it on there. I'm sorry. There's a name for it. It's probably not important that you know it, but anyway, there is. Extracellular polysaccharides, if you want the official name there. That's the one it is.
That's what the red stuff is?
Yeah.
What is it?
Polysaccharide. I think it's like a sugar.
Probably
Saccharides is generally sugar. Poly being many, multiple types. So anyway, extracellular, I don't know. I don't understand it, but there it is. It's the glue that holds this, there's a term for it, glomulin or something like that that's used. And then, so this is kind of an example of the different soil. This would be like tilled soil, the particle size, and then it kind of transitions, gets bigger particles, and then more of these soil aggregates, bigger particles that are good for the soil. So anyway, just so you can physically think about, okay, what am I doing to my soil? Is this looking good? Are the little particles getting bigger? As you rake through it, are they nice little chunks, or are there lots of just very fine stuff? Okay, so then we'll take a look a little bit at soil aggregation, of why it's good. Key indicator of soil quality and productivity, because it's favorable effects on the physical, chemical, and biological properties. So it has lots of different uses. Plays a critical roles in the nutrient cycling, water retention, root growth, erosion control. As you can imagine, water flowing over these little chunks is not going to push them. They're not going to be as small, and they're not going to get absorbed and washed off when you have water going through from a heavy rain event. Plant productivity and environmental quality, it's a lot there, and we could spend hours and hours talking about each one of them. But just to give you an idea, yes, soil aggregation is good. That's basically the summation of this. Increases pore space, reduces the size, water stability, stabilized aggregates, things like that. So anyway, soil aggregation good, and so that's your fungus and your, whatchamacallit, what was I going to say? Oh, the roots. Oh yeah, so the living roots are going to help with that, creating soil aggregates as well as having fungus in there that hasn't been disturbed. So if you're going to till, you want to do just a couple inches down if you need to till, and that way the fungus can come up from the bottom and repopulate. And you had a question?
Because what do you do when you have new ground?
Then you till. Yeah, no, it's fine when you're still breaking ground or you haven't messed with it in like 3 years and it's thick sod or something like that. You just till, and it's fine. It'll regrow. You're not going to have beautiful healthy soil the first year, but after a couple of years of you're covering it with either plastic if you don't have enough mulch, and if you do have enough leaves and grass clippings or anything else like that, organic matter you can set on the surface to keep the weeds down. That will help too, and it'll come back fairly quickly. Within a few years, even with a year, the fungus starts to do its little thing and come back. So here is Singing Frog Farms here. We can take a look at that one real quick. He shows.
I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Paul, and this is Singing Frog Farm.
We're located in West County. Our property is about 8 acres, but we have about 2.5 acres of production. It's all vegetable production. Soil scientists believe that we used to have in our agricultural soils 6 to 10% soil organic matter. And through the active tillage and other poor soil management practices, that is now 1 to 2%. And what we have really found is that 6 to 10% soil organic matter is sort of a magical place to be in. It makes farming just really lovely because the pest pressure goes down. You're able to grow crops that are really healthy, vibrant, nutrient dense. And I think Mother Nature knew something. There's some balance in there where you have a soil organic matter between that 6 and 10%. And I think a lot of our food should be grown in that area.
Soil science is ubiquitous. It's universal. It's the applicability to each region that is going to be a little bit different. And we found people have been able to apply our techniques in every region on the planet with great success. There are really 3 main principles to managing for better soil health. Disturb your soil as little as possible. Keep a diversity of living plants in the ground as often as possible. Keep your soil covered and protected as often as possible. This bed is actually a great example of keeping soil covered and protected all the time. In the morning, this bed was cabbage plants, and we harvested the cabbage for our CSA. And by late morning, we came back through and cut out all the above ground biomass. That went to compost pile. We composted. We left the entire root structure intact. And then we came back through and put down a light half-inch of compost on top of what used to be the cabbage bed. And then we transplanted in our tomatoes with a side dressing of lettuces. It's critical because the tomatoes are sort of a 20-inch spacing, and after you put tomatoes in, you have all this empty bed space that's not being used. That's a lot of bare, exposed soil that's volatilizing nutrients. And we found that we can really put in a crop of lettuce on the sides while tomatoes are getting established. Meanwhile, the high organic matter levels in our soil mean that we can just sink our hands way down in and pull out some big, beautiful black earth. We love having this rich chocolate color. High organic matter earth with old root balls in there still decomposing. Beautiful soil.
As a farmer, our job is to export nutrients and water off of our farm in the form of a cauliflower head or a bunch of kale to you, the consumer. However, if those nutrients are constantly going off of our farm, they need to have a way of coming back.
In fact, if the nutrients leave the farm and don't come back, well, where do they end up? They end up as waste in landfills or in the oceans, and therefore they release their methane and carbon and nitrogen to form greenhouse gas emissions.
So my ideal would be if I sell you vegetables, part of that you're not going to use, you'll put it in your compost bin, it'll get composted, and then it'll come back to my farm
As certified organic compost.
and then we'll continue with that cycle.
One of the benefits of having really high organic matter in our soil is that it helps cut down on soil-borne pests. We also have greater plant health, and therefore
Did that get cut off, or I don't know how to. Let me see if I can skip ahead on that.
I'm Elizabeth.
and I'm Paul.
I don't know. Anyway, that was the majority of it. So, anyway, gives you an idea.
That
Net.
looked really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did.
So that gives the looseness of the soil as well. So you're not having the plant roots struggling to get down into there, but they're not, they're not having to till to get that. And if they did till, that organic matter would soon decrease very quickly over time. Within a year, it tends to or a growing season, 3 months, it can be all burned up. And so that's something to keep an eye on there. And then, so how do we maintain an ideal environment for our biology? And so what is the biology? Just a quick covering of, so we got the bacteria, we got protozoa, which are like big bacteria. They're bigger, they're very tiny, they're microorganisms, but they're just bigger cells that have more stuff going on inside of them. We got our fungus, and we got our nematodes, we got our microarthropods, little creatures that look like maybe like stink bugs or something like that. Only they're just microscopic little beetles. And then we got our arthropods, which are just bigger versions of them. They're still pretty tiny. And then we got our earthworms. So this kind of just gives you an idea of everything that's going on in there. So we got probably even ants or something like that going and making tunnels, and worms making tunnels, and that the tunnels actually are very good. So it's like, oh, tunnels, let me crumble that up and get rid of those tunnels or something like that. Those tunnels allow the water to infiltrate quickly and get into your soil without running off.
Wow.
So it prevents soil erosion and just losing that water off. It's now down in the creek somewhere instead of soaking into your soil. So that's another reason to try to disturb it as little as possible.
So you'll dump worms on your, is that what you do?
No, they'll come. If you build it, they will come.
Oh,
If
cool.
good soil, they'll be
So
there.
if you have organic matter on the surface, the worms will show up to eat it, and they'll pull it down and take compost, and they'll take leaves and they'll pull it down into the soil for you. So you don't need to say, well, how am I going to get all this organic matter in my soil? I'm supposed to have good organic matter in my soil. Maybe I should just till it all in and then it'll just be there. Well, that doesn't work very well. I mean, initially for like a month, you're like, the plants are happy and they grow, and then as the months go on and through the summer, it all gets burned up, and it's like, this soil is getting kind of hard. And where'd all that nice organic matter go? Well, it all got eaten up very quickly because the biology had a party, as it were. The bacteria create new bacteria, and they just more and more just eat through the stuff very quickly, and the fungus will come in there and eat through it as well, and everybody else. And pretty soon, within a couple months, it's all gone. And so all your effort to put organic matter in there is now, they would probably use up more organic matter that was there before, along with the stuff that you tilled in. And so that's why it's best to just lay it on the surface. Just like nature, the leaves fall. You think of the forest, the leaves fall, they break down, and they work, what works them into the soil? Well, it's the biology taking that and bringing it into the soil. And that's why we have soil that's loose in the forest. It isn't all compacted. And there's the roots breaking down every year too. So that's why you want to take your hoe and go at the soil surface and take the top of the plant, compost it, and you leave the roots in the soil. Let them sit in there all winter long and break down and feed the biology, as well as they're adding lots of organic matter, all that root mass, rather than just like, okay, I got all that out of there. just chop it off, and then by the next year, all that root mass, and you may need to chip away if it's like a kale plant or something like that, or broccoli. It may be a little bit of a hard stem that you can just kind of chop just a couple inches down, just to get that little chunk, that hard stuff out of there when you're planting, just to get it out of the way. But there's all kinds of critters eating on that over the winter time, so that's a benefit. So then, let's see here. So a little bit more management practices. Okay, what are some of the stuff what we can do rather than just letting it be? So maintaining good soil moisture, not saturated, full of water. So if you even like a house plant, don't just keep dumping water on it every day. You want to let it, be kind of moist. But if you add too much, it's not good for the biology. Too dry is better than too wet. So too dry, they go dormant. Too wet, they die. So at least the aerobic ones. There's anaerobic bacteria that will survive, and there's some in between that will kind of handle both. But good or aerobic life in there is good for producing CO2. So they're doing a lot of breathing. They're breathing the oxygen, where the anaerobic, I don't think, are releasing oxygen, because they're aerobic means with air. So you want those aerobic bacteria in there. Keep soil surface cool during the summer. So that's the benefit. This is what you're trying to achieve. You don't want your soil to get too hot. Now, we don't have to worry about too much in Oregon, but it can still, if you have bare ground, it's going to heat up. When the temperature is 90 degrees outside, the soil can be even hotter than that, because it's beating down and warming up that soil, and first couple inches can get super hot. So as I mentioned, our 80 degrees is kind of, 80 degrees and below is kind of optimal. Somewhere in there, plants start, when you're doing your plant starts, if you can have the soil 80 degrees with a heat mat or something like that, they'll really jump up and germinate really fast. Most plants, some of them like a little cooler, and then you hit your 110, which I mentioned, yeast also dies at 110. So that's when your biology dies, when it gets too hot. So feed life with plant exudates. So the biology in the soil, you want to feed with plant exudates, which is the sugars and the carbohydrates that the plant is exuding. The extra stuff, usually up to around 60% of what the plant produces from photosynthesis, goes down into the root zone, because they share. So they share more than 50% most of the time. Unless the plant are really struggling, then they may try to conserve. Compost and mulch, so we can feed life with those type of things. Minimize tillage, keep covered all the time as much as possible, no bare soil, cover crops, compost, or mulch. So anyway, kind of repeating this stuff over and over, so it just comes secondhand, and you can, as you go out to your soil, it's like, oh, bare soil, I can take care of that, or I need to take care of that type of a idea.
So what do you do for walkways? Do you try to cover that and walk on something, or leave bare dirt?
Generally bare dirt, just because I'm needing to hoe those out, and the weeds need to be hoed constantly. The compost kind of gets mixed in there too. But I don't worry so much about the walkways, because that's not an actively growing area. That little strip, I have like 12-inch walkways, and then 30-inch beds, 2.5 feet. So I optimize for putting all my compost and stuff on the bed areas themselves, and they're going to get trampled down and wheelbarrows down there, so it's not really an optimal growing area. The roots can go down underneath, but there can be the problems with the surface of the soil being exposed. I don't want stuff to grow in my pathways. No. So the weeds are going to struggle to germinate, because hey, maybe the biology is probably very little biology in that couple inches where I've been walking and treading, and things like that. Some people like to put wood chips. That can work too. I find they kind of get, it's this messy border that you don't want to get all the wood chips mixed in, and you don't want to lose your compost in the wood chips because you can't get it then back out, and and so sometimes it can just be a big hassle to deal with wood chips, but that can also be a good option. And some people do grass, or other little plants in your walkways. There's lots of different ideas of what you can do. Sometimes it's just good to keep it simple and keep it, it's like, well, if I have wood chips, that means I have to put the wood chips out every year or every couple years, and then I have to, what happens when there's weeds growing in the wood chips? How are you supposed to extract them? You got to get out there and pull them out, because hoeing's going to start mixing in all this, burying the wood chips in the dirt, and so that you find there's problems. And to get rid of those problems, sometimes you do things that's like, well, it's all right. You can have a little bare soil on your walkways to get rid of some of the problems and some of the extra work that you have to put in. The plants still do well, because you're optimizing the bed area.
And when you say
So.
no bare soil, when you have something like that. But while you have something growing, so to keep the moisture.
Well, you'd want to put just like what Paul was doing. He put compost like an inch or so on the bed, and then you plant into that, so that protects the soil.
Who was doing that, sir?
Paul Kaiser, the Singing Frog Farms.
That part in the beginning.
The last one that we were
Oh.
showing there. But anyway, he was demonstrating that before he transplants.
All that dirt. But that's a good soil, so covered.
Yeah, even that soil is covered with a layer of compost. That's what he puts down in between, so he pulled out one, chopped it all off, got rid of the tops, and then laid down some more compost, and then transplanted into that. So rather than putting seeds, he's doing transplants. So that's what all those big trays they were carrying around. So there's little clues, and that's why these videos you have to kind of watch about 6 times, and kind of it's like, oh, hey, I see their greenhouse. They're growing these transplants. Oh, I get it now. They're putting these little 4-inch plants into the soil, and then that's why it's like, how did he get those lettuce so fast? Well, they're plug it in right there. After they get so big, they put them in there, and then they grow them in the thing, and they harvest them, and then the next ones are ready to be put in right after it, so you can get multiple generations, one right after the other.
Is that like a mesh for insects that they had?
Yep. Yeah, so that's the white coverings is to protect flea beetles and other stuff that are hard to, cucumber beetles, anything else, any pest that might be in there, just to give a little extra protection, because people don't tolerate holes in their food, no matter if it's benign or, been washed thoroughly. You don't have to necessarily do that unless you got a plague coming in. Sometimes you get a plague, and then you just kind of, okay, my plants all died. I'll just try it again next year. I've had them. Cucumber beetles are very vicious some years. Sometimes you do shed a tear or two when when your broccoli is like demolished.
Well, they have. I wonder how
it's not every year.
A lot of produce for, their.
Yeah, the CSA. Yeah,
they have to protect their.
Yeah, they have to make it look pretty.
There.
So that's what the insect netting is generally for, is that prettiness, because they'll take a few bites and then stop. Well, then you still have holes in your produce, and people are like, that's bug eaten. I don't want that. And people are very particular about things when they go to the grocery store. It's got to be pretty. So.
I read this article, I don't know, a few years ago. It said bananas, people like them to have a certain angle.
Yeah.
They can't be too straight.
I've heard
Yeah, and these different, characteristics that they want in apples or pears, but bananas, I'm like, but
interesting.
it's not like you go and measure the angle, but it just looks more aesthetic. If it's too bent, it's too bent, but if it's too flat out, it's kind of weird. So
now you're going to have me looking at my banana.
There's a wide variety.
It's a specific little curve, but not too curvy, but
yeah, right. It's got to sit like a telephone, right? From one end to your mouth.
But, it's like people don't measure, but you're kind of like, oh, it looks kind of weird, and they just grab another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And cucumbers too. You'll notice if you have your own cucumbers, keep them in plastic bags, because they'll get all floppy, and you're like, ooh, what happened? My store-bought ones don't do that, because they put a nice coat of paraffin on all the cucumbers to keep the moisture from escaping. So you just shove it in a plastic bag or a Ziploc bag and seal it up, and guess it does the same thing. It keeps the moisture in and keeps them nice and crisp. And also your greens, you can put them in a little cup of water or something like that, and they'll get nice and crispy again. If they get a little limp, you can rehydrate them. The minerals that will still be diminished. I'm experimenting with salt water to see, Himalayan salt water to see if it will maybe soak up a few more minerals to get in there. I don't know, but
Celtic salt has more minerals than Himalayan salt.
Celtic?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It has 90. Barbara O'Neill talks
It's
about
up.
that.
It's up to 90 or so.
That one, yeah.
Wait, I think Himalayan has 72 or 82, and
Yeah, it's around the 80s, I think, 84 or somewhere.
and I
It's all
think,
debatable.
Celtic salt has 10 or 20. I want to say 92.
Yeah. Okay.
92.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So one is obviously more expensive than the other, I think you'll find. So unless you can find a good source, maybe you can find a good source. I get mine about 20 pounds at a time. So which is $30 or something like that, or somewhere in that range. I can't remember now what it was the last time I bought it, but if you find it on Amazon, you can get a big bag of the stuff, and it's fairly economical.
Big bag of what?
The Himalayan pink salt. But I haven't found any other salt that's that cheap that has that many minerals. So anyway, I don't know if we need to cover this here. Why cover the soil? Biology, I think we covered all that already. Prevents erosion. Water infiltration, that's another thing I didn't really cover very much yet. So bare soils, it's going to splash off and run off, or or puddle a lot easier. But if you have that organic matter layer, it's going to soak in much faster. So here's a farm field. Probably not what our gardens look like, but could. Crusted over soil. So silt tends to crust over more than other soils. Sand doesn't crust over real easy. Clay, a little less than silt. But a lot of farmers have this issue where you see the cracking, and so the water doesn't just kind of runs off easily when it gets crusted over like that. And so a lot of times what they call is the seed bed. And so they have this nice tillage they go through, and then they do a very fine tillage of this kind of powdery stuff on the surface, and they plant in that. And that gives good seed contact with the soil, and they germinate well. But you have a bunch of other problems with water infiltration when you do that. The water doesn't like to go into that fluffy material, very fine particles. So you see, this is good a practice. I mean, they need more, but this is past crop that they've chopped up and left on the surface. So they're doing something right. It isn't completely bare soil. They're doing their best, but it's still a lot of bare soil that is there. And then wind. I'm sure you've seen the tractors out there tilling. You don't get too much in your own garden, so it isn't so much of an issue. But on the farm scale, you see when they do all their tillage after their crops in the late summer, you see these dust storms come through, and these little you drive along I-5 or something, you see a bunch of dust, and which is the reason why the Dust Bowl happened, because all these tilled fields, and the wind came, and it was a dry year, I think, and blew all the topsoil away. Put it all the way to New York or something like that, all over the country. Blew all the topsoil off, and the people just had to get up and move, because these beautiful prairies soil that was maybe 6 feet deep before in places was no longer, you couldn't grow crops in there anymore without the topsoil. So protecting it is important. And then this is what water erosion. It runs. There's a field here, and the water's run off and washed away a lot of the soil. So again, you see most of the stuff is in big fields. Most of the time, you get some water erosion if you get a big rainstorm, but not so much, just because it's not such a huge area. You have grass around it or something like that can absorb a lot, so that what's actually hitting your garden is not a terrific amount, but just another good reason to keep the soil covered. let's see, you can take a look at this real quick here. So water soil erosion demo, water infiltration, just to
Good morning.
cement it in your mind.
I'm a soil scientist for NRCS in Louisiana. With me is Chris Carell, the state agronomist with NRCS in Louisiana. And what we'd like to talk to you today about is soil health. And we're going to be demonstrating our rainfall simulation unit, which simulates a rainfall event. And we're going to look at erosion under different relative amounts of cover on soil types. NRCS has become involved with the soil health initiative nationwide. And we're looking at things that improve soil health across the board. Primarily, one of the major issues is trying to keep cover on the ground all the time, plants growing, diversity of plants, disturb the soil as little as possible, and the primary idea is to try to build organic matter in the soil. But back to the rainfall simulation unit here. What we have are soil pans packed with soils. These are identical soils taken from within about 3 feet of each other. This pan simulates a natural vegetative cover, thick vegetative cover. The other two on the other extreme, the pan that's been heavily tilled simulates heavily tilled soil, and something intermediate, a soil that has been tilled but has a residue cover on it. And we're going to look at ideally the differences in amount of under a simulated rainfall, amount of runoff and amount of infiltration and flow through into the soils, simulating soil water storage and availability for plant uptake later on. And additionally, if you look at these pans, they're about 2 inches thick, and the ideal soil would have about 50% pore space. So with a 50% pore space in a 2-inch pan, you would think a 1-inch simulated rainfall would totally saturate that soil, and you would start to see flow through if every drop of water went into the soil. So what we're going to do is, in a minute, we're going to turn the rainfall simulator on, and we're going to watch, and when we get about 1 inch of simulated rainfall on there, we're going to cut it off and look at the results.
So 1 inch of rain is showing there.
The difference between, again, tilling your soil and what people think is loosening it up to improve infiltration, keeping residue on the surface, which you may do with undercutting tools. There may be some tillage involved, but again, you allow some residue to remain on the surface. And what we're doing here is simulating, say, a cover crop that you're planting during the winter, or again, during the growing season, right before, right after your cash crop. What's happened here, if you look at the jars, and again, we'll take them off for you, is that the majority of the water that we've applied is run off of the field. Very little infiltration has occurred, and most of the water that's being applied either by rainfall or through your irrigation system is being lost. Not only are you losing water that you're applying, but you're also losing topsoil. The precious topsoil that you're trying to build is being lost along with all the nutrients. Nutrients and organic matter that's being built up in that surface few inches is being lost to nearby waterways. And I can't say this enough, but water quality is probably the #1 resource concern right now that the Ag Center as well as NRCS is dealing with across the country. So just know it's very important for you to keep that topsoil, that organic matter, and those nutrients on your operation. You can see just by leaving a little bit of residue that we have quite a bit more infiltration. You can see the difference between bare soil and just a little bit of surface residue. What that surface residue is doing is protecting the soil and again dissipating that energy from the raindrop, allowing it to slowly infiltrate into the soil. And those very small particles, instead of being dislodged and blinding off those pore spaces that allow infiltration, it's allowing the water to slowly infiltrate. And I mean, you do have some infiltration. This is kind of a in between, or I mean, it's okay, but it could be better. And you can see there is some flow through into the system. This is water that you're banking for later on, and this is your water storage capacity. And you can see the best system is again to keep a living root growing throughout the year. And the best way to do that, in addition to obviously growing your cash crops, is to plant cover crops. And cover crops will not only help you improve infiltration year-round, but they'll also help you build organic matter. And it's organic matter that's responsible for holding that soil structure in place, keeping it intact, and maintaining that water holding capacity that's so important for, again, taking advantage of irrigation water that you apply or Mother Nature's rainwater. What you just saw is not only applicable to large-scale agriculture, but also very applicable to your vegetable operations, anything else that you're growing out, even small-scale operations. You can take these same principles and apply them to what you're doing. On your vegetable operations, some of you have the option of moving the area around that you plant from year to year. This is also a great time for you to plant cover crops. In doing that, you can bring a different root system and supercharge that system, not by just allowing annual weeds to come up or volunteer plants to come up, which may not produce as much biomass as cover crops, but you can choose what's planted out there and plant something that you know you can control, produces a lot of biomass. You can control how much root diversity you have, and in essence, instead of maybe a 3-crop rotation, you can build in a 12, 15-crop rotation. So just think about that. Maybe planting 2 years in one area, and that third year planting a cover crop, letting it go out, maybe naturally senesce, or terminating it around the first flower. And what you'll find is that that following year, after that cover crop, you'll reap the benefits. What you're seeing here, this dry spot in the center, is what you can expect to see across your entire field. There is some side creep going on in this tray, and that's one of the limitations of the equipment. But what you see, it being dry in the center, represents infiltration in a field that's been heavily tilled. But you can see by having just a little bit of residue on the surface, you get a little better infiltration, really a better compromise than having nothing covering the soil.
In a bare soil in a field, you wouldn't have this effect where you had forced infiltration. You would retain this effect until you had standing water on the soil or very long duration rainfall. You'd have to have a positive head of water pressure to drive that water in where you didn't have runoff any longer.
In the tray that had what would represent a cover crop, you can see that all the water infiltrated. And this is what you would see, again, as your water bank going into those periods of time where it's very dry. Especially important on crops where you have little access or no access to irrigation. So again, you want to take advantage of what Mother Nature provides for you. Just having a 2 or 3 crop rotation, you can have a 16, 15, 14, many crops within a single year. Very diverse root system, and that diverse root system and diverse soil ecology is going to help you take care of problems with insects and disease.
Kind of in summary, the 4 primary soil health principles that we try to discuss and impart to people is plant diversity. The more plant diversity, the better. Plant diversity leads to microbial diversity and overall soil health, cycling of more diverse nutrients, more organic matter accumulated in the soil. Disturb the soil as little as possible. Again, this is a perfect example of that. It was tilled to oblivion. As minimal disturbance of the soil as possible is best. Try to keep a living plant on the soil year-round to protect that soil. And year-round here in Louisiana, we have enough biological activity that you can grow plants almost 12 months out of the year. Keep those nutrients cycling through those plants up into the surface of the plant. When it senesces, you're recycling your nutrients thoroughly again. When you can't grow a cover crop year-round, a live living plant, at a minimum, try to keep the soil covered with some type of material, obviously mulch or other crop residues. So again, keep the soil covered. And those are the 4 primary soil health principles that we try to impart to people.
If you'd like to learn a little bit more about soil health, cover crops, or conservation, please come into any one of the NRCS field offices near you or LSU Ag Center extension offices and ask us for a little bit of assistance. We'd love to hear from you and learn a little bit more about what you're doing. And if it's something worth sharing, we'd be more than happy to share what you've learned about soil health for the rest of Louisiana.
So anyway, if that reinforces those principles a little bit,
Wow.
see what
Teaching
the
farmers.
actual effect is. So the farmers can be a good example. You know what the farmers do. You know that's their business. You know they got to rely on that. So if they've figured out some good tricks that we can incorporate into our own gardens, it's good to learn from them. So.
Are you in with the farmer crowd, and are you in the loop with all that?
Not really. No, it's hard to get into that loop. my neighbor's a farmer, so I talk to him occasionally
Really?
about stuff. But
Because I heard, kind of back to your quotes from the beginning, but they're making it hard for farmers,
oh yeah,
and it's almost like they want them to stop making food.
well they want to be able to sell out to people like Bill Gates and
Yeah, so they're trying to,
big corporations that's buying huge
like Amazon,
sections.
Bill Gates, they're trying to take everything over,
Yep.
and they're almost trying to start a food shortage, you know.
Well, they're buying a lot of land too.
That's valuable stuff, and
'Cause everything's
that's where the
gone
money.
up,
That's
you know,
where the
it's-
money is, because whoever owns the land can control everybody else down the line. Say, well, this is what we're going to pay you to farm this land.
You
Yeah.
control the food production, you control the masses.
Yeah. I mean, even the chicken, the egg stuff going on.
Oh yeah, you have to do everything the certain way, and you have to buy their equipment. And if you want to farm chickens to, either eggs or meat production.
Well, I was watching, I'm not sure how much of this is true or not, but the whole chicken feed thing, supposedly, some TikTokers were putting that they were giving their chickens the feed from the store or
That's
whatever,
right.
and the chickens were not producing, and some people caught onto that, and they were doing their own chicken feed, and then the chickens were okay and producing again.
Yeah.
So I posted that on Facebook, wondering, those people that have chickens, any truth to this? But nobody,
Yeah.
I didn't have too many people that knew had chickens.
Get right in him.
My neighbor
I
has
don't know.
chickens here. So she said, yeah, she stopped buying the store stuff and started keeping her eggs, and her chickens make eggs.
Yeah, we just fed our chickens, I think, whole corn and wheat as a supplement, and then they were out there picking bugs the rest of the day, and they did great. They get all nice healthy eggs. Bug-fed chickens, yum. Doesn't sound good, but it's the best. That's where all they need the protein and nutrition to make good eggs.
But now they want people to consume.
We didn't have any roosters, so there's no hatching.
Yeah, they're promoting this
But,
eating in Europe, eating bugs.
I don't think so.
I don't know if there's
That's what
anything
they want
else.
to do because they want to stop people from eating meat, which I agree with.
So there's that. Okay, one last slide. You might as well finish it up here.
Right.
We don't eat meat.
It's good gas exchange. That's the last topic. I haven't got to this yet. This is so at nighttime, oxygen and nitrogen go into the soil. It's kind of like it falls in and goes through the soil structure. Let's see, carbon in the form of sugars goes down into the roots and into the soil as root exudates from the plant. We know about that. Oxidation, so then the biology will use the oxygen. So the bacteria will breathe in that oxygen. They'll breathe out carbon dioxide, right? So organic matter and microbial respiration. And then during the morning time, we have oxygen coming back, carbon dioxide coming back out of the soil. And then as the plant gets the sunshine and gets all this nice carbon dioxide, it is able to grow and do the photosynthesizing. So CO2 is supposed to come from microbial respiration if there are good biology in there. Out in nature, that's where all the carbon dioxide is normally coming from, not the biology eating up organic matter. So then, let's see, exhales, CO2 in the background atmosphere is about 400 parts per million is kind of the average out, 20 feet up or something like that in the atmosphere. In the morning time, air can be as heavily loaded with CO2. It can be as high as 20 or 30,000 parts per million of CO2. That is 6 to 8 inches deep. True for microbial active soils. If you don't have microbial active soils, or if your soil is kind of dead, you won't get much CO2 off, and your plants will sit there struggling to photosynthesize because they don't have enough CO2. So that would be what we call a limiting factor for them to grow well. Plants can't photosynthesize very much if there's not sufficient CO2 levels. So compacted soil, we don't get this going on because the air can't get in there. So we do want, aggregates where air can, move around through the soil. It's not compacted and it's not all fluffed up and ground up. So that's why tilling your soil isn't always going to improve your ability for the air to get in there. It will a little bit for a little bit, a little time because you're in putting a lot of oxygen in there, but it's going to sink down and the structure is going to go away. It's going to, you'll see it. Choo, 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 choo. You measure it. It's like, my soil dropped. And that's the way when you plant something new, a tree or something, you'll see that especially. You come back and it's like, it's now a little dip where it was mounded. And you wonder what happened. Well, all the pore space got collapsed, all the organic matter got chewed up, and therefore you have this dip in there. So that's what happens in your garden. It's going to compact like that. So they recommend out in the fields to do what's called a chisel plow or something like that. It's basically dragging it's like a piece of metal that goes straight down, maybe a couple feet deep, and then it's got a little plow head on the that they just drag through there, and that kind of lifts up a little bit and gives a little bit of aeration and little channels for air to get into the soil. And they do that every couple, like 3 feet apart or something like that. They do some runs through the field, and that really helps with air infiltration into the soil. What we use in the garden is either a garden fork or a broad fork, which is a very large version of a garden fork. Usually has like 6 or 8 tines, and they're maybe 18 inches long. You just jam that in there and you pull it back just a little bit, and that cracks the soil a little bit in order to get some air in there, get the biology going.
Like a forklift?
No. So you think of a garden fork where you got 4 tines that are about 9 to 10 inches long.
Yeah, like a forklift. Not a forklift, but a pitchfork. What did you say?
Pitchfork. So a pitchfork is going to be very fine tines, and they're going to bend on you. If you have very good soil, you can kind of do that, but don't. You want something with some really tough tines.
Where do you find one of those?
A garden fork?
Yeah.
Online if you want a good one, because usually if you go to Bi-Mart, it's gonna, as soon as you start bending on it and hitting a few rocks, all of a sudden you'll have these weird little, tines will be all kinds of different directions because they're cheap Chinese stuff. So stainless steel or something that's really old. Or I got one that's from Austria. That's got, forged, something old that's been forged. And so you go to the thrift stores and you look for old tools, because that's the stuff from unless it's just, 20 years ago, and then it's probably still soft.
So $51.32.
Yeah. So that's your range. Your $50 range is kind of your threshold of actually getting something that isn't going to bend on you. Stuff has gotten really cheap over the last 10, 20 years.
There's never been, spear and jack never been professional, $42.28.
Yeah, broad forks are in the hundreds, maybe $200 or $300. So they're not terribly economical unless you got a big farm that you're doing it all the time, and you want to get a little, and then you don't use it for very long, and then you have to get rid of it because all your soil's loose and you've fixed the problem. So that's what you can do when you after you till, you can kind of fix the soil, because the tilling also compacts the soil underneath the area where you till. It's nice and fluffy here, but underneath that you've now put a heavy equipment, maybe several times that you've, compressed a little bit. At least that's, maybe not the first time you do it, but if every year you till, it's going to create a compaction layer. And also the fluffy to, more compacted soil, the water's going to hit that and then move off and not go any deeper.
Yeah.
It's going to, difference in soil texture, plant water does not like to go through those barriers. It's kind of like when it hits a change, it kind of stops.
So question, how frequent would you recommend doing that, or just when you?
Oh, that, when you find your soils, all the organic matter's been chewed up and it's very compact and hard before you plant, like in the spring, you say, well, how hard is that? Ooh, that's pretty hard. You may want to go through there with the garden fork. There are videos online of how to do that. I think I even have one. Well, no, did I ever create one? I don't think I ever bothered because there's so many that are out there. Curtis Stone has a really good one too on how to do it. It's like every 6 inches, I think, you put the fork in there. You pull it back just at about, not very much, just a little bit. Just kind of from vertical back a little bit.
30 degrees.
Yeah, you'll see it crack just a little bit. And then you lift up, you stomp it down in there and you pull it back and you just kind of keep working backwards. As you put it in there, you kind of keep going back, or you can go across, back and forth, if you, however wide your bed is. But that's a good thing to do to get the oxygen going and to get things going, because you may not have enough CO2 if you don't have very much organic matter in your soil for them to eat. And if the biology, can't get the oxygen in, they're not going to exhale to let it come out either. And so, anyway.
Are we almost finished? I gotta go.
Yep, we're done. So that was the last slide.